This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. We speak from our personal experiences and opinions. The views expressed are solely those of the individual speaker and are not intended to malign any group, club, organization, or business.
Welcome to Confronting the Line, where we examine the world of personal development, transformation, and self-help, and explore the sometimes blurred line between transformation and exploitation. My name is Mark Tafoya, and I'm here with Ann L. Peterson, author of the book, Is This a Cult?, where Ann recounts her experiences in the trenches of the world of self-help. Hi, Ann.
Hi, Mark. Okay, the glasses game is looking good. You're going to have to take me shopping so I can keep up here.
Okay, yeah, I guess, yeah, I have several of these kinds, yeah. So we're yeah, today we're so excited to be joined by Dale Dickins, who is host of the podcast Life After Landmark. She was formerly a staff member at Landmark Worldwide in Melbourne, Australia, and has been hosting her podcast for a while. And really, she was one of the first people to start talking about the dark side of this line that we're confronting. So as a pioneer in this realm, we decided we needed to have Dale on with us so that we could together discuss kind of what it's like to have been the people who are talking about this, right? And get this stuff out in the open, and the particularly strange phenomenon when you become that person that people now approach to kind of come out of the closet about their experiences with Landmark. So welcome, Dale. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's really great to finally be able to speak openly and honestly about the experience, because it was so intense and it really affected me on so many different levels. Psychologically, physically, my well-being really diminished. I was struggling with my dark side. So I brought up a lot, and not being able to talk to anybody was, oh my God, it was so frustrating, because it was only my internal dialogue that I could listen to. And then I kept repeating myself over and over. And that's why I started listening to the ex-Scientologists and approached them because they were speaking openly and honestly. And that provided some relief for me. I wasn't like, I had somebody that I could compare notes with, so to speak. And although Landmark, I call it Scientology light, it's nowhere near as, I would say, damaging as Scientology. However, the remnants were there. There were so many common threads that I just sat nodding. It was like, wow. And now to be able to actually speak with people about it, it's like, great. Because it needs discussion. We have to talk about the groups that we associate ourselves with. It's really, really important right now.
Yeah.
Well, Dale, so great. I know it was when I heard somebody sent me right after my book came out, somebody sent me your interview with Chris Shelton, which you did in 2020. I was so amazed.
Yeah, 4 years ago.
That you had had a conversation, and you didn't particularly say much, even bad, like too much about the dark side, so to speak, and that, like, it wasn't like some huge salacious thing. It's that you were talking to an ex-Scientologist and comparing the worlds, which now I know Chris myself, thanks to the introduction from you, but also I've talked to a number of ex-Scientologists and a lot of people as well that were around in the early days of EST and the early days of the Werner Erhard and Associates and so on, and have come to kind of understand that a lot of Landmark's work, tech, whatever, is based in Scientology ideas. So there is a lot of crossover. But before we kind of get into that, I'd love to, just for our audience, and we'll link to your show in our show notes, but tell us just a little bit about your Landmark career. So how did you end up in Landmark? Kind of give us the Cliff Notes. How did you end up at Landmark, and then on staff for how long and what kind of positions? Just kind of give us, if we were meeting at a party, we would be swapping Landmark bios, right? Like, because that's what you do as Landmark people. You're like, oh, I did one of these. I did the forum and this time. And So give us your Landmark bio.
Well, I was in a relationship with somebody who'd done, I think, the curriculum for living. And it was basically either if you want to be in a relationship with me, then these are the conditions and you must do the Landmark for it.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. And because I'd spoken I was really, really troubled about my childhood. I didn't have anybody that I could speak with about it. I didn't even know. I couldn't make sense of it myself. I basically run away from home when I was 16. I moved to a different state. And then when I could, I literally got on a boat from Perth to Sri Lanka, traveled through Europe. It's like the furthest distance I could get from my family, thinking that was going to be a solution to what was going on. Little did I know what was going on was all in my head, and I just kept recreating the past anyway. In this relationship with this guy, I started talking because, developing a relationship, I can share some intimate information. And I remember, most people, well, not most people, because I didn't share it with many people. I didn't really trust many people. Usually when I'd had a few drinks, I'd start opening up. They shared something with him, and he just looked at me and he said, okay. And I was like, whoa, that's a different response. And with it, the tagline was, do the landmark forum. And I was like, I had no idea what he was talking about. I'd never done any self-help, so to speak, courses. It wasn't my interest. And I shared a little more. And then, later on, I shared a little more. And I was I don't know if I was testing him with the information to develop trust. I probably most likely was. And I shared a little bit more intimate information. And he, again, straight face. It's like, I was kind of like, wow. Usually people have empathy or, say, poor you or whatever. And he said, and again came the tagline, do the landmark forum. I was like, what is it? Then I'd start with, well, what is it? And I think he said, and then he laid down the law. It's like, if you want to be in a relationship with me, you're going to have to do it because you need to be able to deal with your past in a way that we can talk about it. And I was just like, and as soon as I said, okay, that weekend, the weekend of the forum, I think I said yes on Monday. He had me in the forum on a Friday. He called, registered me. I paid for it. He called, registered me, which I knew afterwards was a breach of
policy
breach
or whatever.
of the protocol. Yeah, you're not supposed to register somebody that late. But I'd advertised my apartment for somebody to share with me. And this guy organized everything. He handled everything. He's just like, you go do the forum. I'll interview this guy. And if I think, I'll run it by you. And if you think that he's okay, then he can move in even the following weekend. And I was just like, wow, I was put on this roller coaster of like dealing with the potential relationship, going into a course I knew nothing about, and then having somebody that he basically had chosen to share my house with. It was just like, and I was kind of like, well, okay.
Wow.
So I did the forum, and I remember, and I wanted some description of what it was I'd be entering into. And he said, there'll be a lot of people there. There's people who assist. And he also said they do an introduction, but I wouldn't recommend it. And I was just like, what is going on?
Oh, man, red flag.
So much information to deal with. So I walked into what was called the technology center. There were tables and my name tag. My name was spelled wrong, so I picked them up on that. And they dealt with it immediately. And there were all these friendly faces. I walked into a huge room. There were blackboards at the time. There was something called the Curriculum for Living on the wall. And that had a series of courses. And I was just like, what the hell have I walked into?
But
So I
do
just
do you remember? So this had to have been in the 90s because that was still but remember this? Does anybody remember the tagline? This is what's fun about also for our audience. This was like when you get a bunch of landmarkians together, like from the past. Like, do you remember the tagline? It was something like living a life you love and living it powerfully or something, right? Was that it? Did it just come out right?
The Curriculum for Living a Life You Love and Living It Powerfully, word for word, that's what it was. Like the of this big poster on the wall. And I was just like, okay, how's this going to start? And David Miles was a forum leader, and he started with who he has been pressured to be in the room. I put my hand up. I'm just like, all of these conditions have been placed. That was pressure. And then
I can't date my person unless I do this thing.
Right.
Yes, that's right. There was, and I was having somebody to share a house with that.
Enrollment would come later, right? Like enrolling people in a possibility that came after the 90s, folks. That was in the 2000s.
Right. Until then, it was just pure pressure. Do
That's
it,
right.
or I won't love you. And so about 2/3 of the room put their hand up, and I was just like, oh, I'm in the right place here then. And then David Miles unraveled what pressure was. So he said, so did your parents or did whoever invited you threaten you physically? Put your hand up if they did. I'm like, well, I couldn't say it. So about half of the room put their hand up, and I was just like, wow, what? And then he just kept breaking it down what pressure was. And in the end, there was one one young girl who had their hand up, and she was still like adamant. And he said, well, come to the microphone and talk about what that pressure was. And her parents, conditional, she wasn't going to get an allowance. She would have a curfew. It was just like, it sounded pretty hardcore. But what was really interesting was the way she was standing. She had like arms crossed, nose up in the air, and she was spitting out the answers. She was like, they said, nah, 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 nah. And David Miles was just really cool, calm, collected. He's like, okay, taking the information. Okay, well, what about, do you think they love you? And it was just like, these conversations happening. But what was really important for me, the pivotal moment that got me, was I saw myself in speaking with my mother when this young girl was standing. I was just like, that's how I talk to my mum. And I swear, I thought somebody had taken a mirror past this girl to reflect it back at me. I looked around at the people who were assisting to see if that had actually happened. I was convinced that's what had happened. And in that moment, I was just like, I'd been slapped across the face, told to wake up and get a real sense of myself in the face of authority or, somebody that was trying to control me. I sat there from that moment on the edge of my seat. I literally was on the edge of my seat because I was doing a physical postural I was teaching a postural alignment course, and I was all about sitting straight, shoulders down. So I was sitting on the edge of my seat for the whole 3 days. And the course supervisor reminded me afterwards, he's like, I watched you the whole time and you were just like this. I was like that the whole time. And I just soaked it in. And as soon as, there were numerous incidents during that course, the memorable moments, a guy that stuttered, he started to share something, and it was like the discomfort in the room was tangible. People were just like, oh God, I wish he'd spit it out. And it was really bad stuttering. But David Miles still persisted and listened. And he was like, sit down. No, stop moving and listen. It was just like, what do you mean? I'm like, he's stuttering. Well, I don't have to listen to that. They're like the arrogance. I got to hear myself so clearly. And by the end of the course, it still moves me. This guy spoke so clearly. So it was like, God, what happens when you listen to somebody? So things like that, I was like, what is this? I want more of it. And I want to be able to not stand with people, but listen to people in the way that David's doing it. And the way I heard I could do that was by doing the next course. So that's what got me.
Well, interesting the way that we just did an episode with Chris talking about weaponized empathy or weaponized empaths. And that just strikes me a little bit. I'm still in that exploration of what does that really mean and what does that really look like? And is that true? But that sort of strikes me there. So there you are, vulnerable, open, touched. Later, we would call it touch, moved, and inspired. That's the definition of enrollment, right? So, but then that immediately is used to get you to register in the next course. Like, to me, that's where, and that happens in all these kinds of programs, right? Like, and I've been in sales since I was in the 20s. Like, you always want to ask for the sale in the moment that people are inspired, because that is where people act. But in these programs, it seems particularly touchy because a lot of the, we don't know yet what the results are going to be. We don't know yet. And we do know that there's a certain percentage of people that that's really harmful in those, or can be. Not all, but some.
It's
So that was
also
interesting.
interesting.
That just struck me right from the episode we just did about that. Was like, oh wow, look at
Yeah.
that. There it is right there.
But this is just such a great example of the program is great. Like people have these moments where they're like,
Mhm.
wow, something really opened up for me, right? Like listening to you, Dale, talking about how like I thought someone put a mirror right up to me because she was being me. Like, wow, that's the power of these kinds of courses. And, we're sometimes criticized because, people say, oh, you never say anything good about Landmark. Well, we all for years have said great things about Landmark, just like that, right? Being very moved by what's possible when people just drop the artifice and get real. And then they notice, oh my God, me too, you, me, oh my God, we're the same, and we're different skin colors, different gender, different whatever.
Different
And
ages, different professions.
yeah,
There's
that's
like
an amazing
prostitutes
thing
and
about
doctors.
humanity.
Well,
So
that's
we
the
will
value
always
of a
say that's
group.
great when people connect. That's an amazing thing. And Landmark did that really well. Really well.
And it is, some people have asked me like, well, okay, large group awareness trainings, which is what Landmark definitely is, a large group awareness training. And that's a particular thing that started being studied in the 70s when EST and all that started to arose. They were tending to these sort of large group encounter groups as sort of a little bit more like thing. And people say to me all the time, oh, so are just large groups dangerous? I'm like, no, there's a lot of magic in the group because of exactly that. You see yourself. Group therapy is, very highly regarded. And I've been in some myself. I'm in I do other programs that are in groups and it's lovely and whatnot. Those aren't necessarily the dangerous bits. And I do want to say, for people out there, again, what we now know through study, through 50 years of history and whatnot, is that there are cautions that not everybody has that kind of experience. There's a fair number of people that go through a program like the Forum, like LifeSpring, Context, all the babies that came out of the mind dynamic est era, and the worst case have psychological breaks, and have very hyper amazing experiences, and then it doesn't come to fruition. So
it's suicide is the worst case.
Yes.
And that,
I think you have a personal experience with that, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah, my housemate committed suicide, and I knew in the Perth Centre, Perth, Western Australia, tiny centre, 3.5 staff full-time and 1 part-time. I knew of 2 other people who committed suicide and another 2 kind of indirectly.
Yeah.
And then after doing the interview or the conversation with Chris, I spoke with someone who worked in the head office, and he gave me more statistics, and it was like, this is wrong. Like, something is really wrong here, and particularly the company knows. They know, and they're still continuing. I want to come back to a couple of things that have been said so far. One is that with Chris, the reason I approached him was that first, there was like Landmark, there was so many comparisons with Landmark. And I was waiting, I just kept waiting for somebody to step in, an ex-forum leader or somebody to connect with him. And I realized that nobody's going to. You're it, Dale. You're it. And I was like, oh my God, but it's so long ago.
Where have we heard that?
Yeah, exactly.
You're the one. Be the one.
Exactly. And I took it on, and I thought, what I was hearing most, it wasn't necessarily about the content of the courses. It was the architecture, that there were so many volunteers and a small core group of people directing the movements. That's what got me. It was like, that's the common ground that I could also see and hear and experience in other groups. They were taking that on because of work. So, having somebody say, if you want to do the course and you need to fully commit, I'm just like, cut it out, stop. I've been there, we're not going there. Don't use that on me. because it had worked for Scientology, it worked for Landmark. So other splinter groups took that same architecture on. The orgasmic meditation group, that's a spin-off from
Right.
Landmark.
Mm-hmm.
Having
Yeah.
women laying on their floor with their legs spread while somebody's masturbating them. It's like, come on, how? And the same principles, a small core group of people, you climb through the ranks. I'm like, that's what got me. It's like, we have to address this. It's not necessarily the content, but it's the way these businesses are organized, profiting and using people as slave labor. That's what really called me to contact Chris. It's like, I want to speak with people where I can have these conversations. And I thought by opening up my experience, that's why I simply went through the courses to show how people were being registered from one into the other. I wanted to get into, I don't know if I was effective in it, but I wanted people to see how this is this so-called, well, the business only exists because registrations were being pulled. 42% of people were being pulled from the forum into the advanced course. And then 70% of those are being pulled into, distributed into the communication curriculum, assisting, ILP, a seminar. Like that's 70%. And the way I was trained to get those statistics, to make sure that, all of the lists were dissected into who was underage, who was a reviewer,
who was potential for what. Yeah.
Out of area.
Oh God, all those games, right? How can we eliminate people so it looks like our statistics are even better than they
to
are?
the core group of the true potential, and get those statistics to the forum leader within 40 minutes. Not even, like during the forum in action, have a full list of people that had signed their card by the end of the break. Work out who was, and they'd say, "Oh, I'm going to Argentina." Okay, great. That's an out of area. I'm moving to a different area, so I can't do the seminar. Okay, well, they're out of area. It's like working through those statistics, counting through all of the cards, having them marked off, having people organize them, get the prelim statistics to the forum leader so that they knew how effective their announcement was, how their enrollment practices were listened.
I can imagine, Dale, there's two things that really strike me, because I can imagine some people listening are like, well, you're just talking about business. I mean, you're talking about business, and business has to produce results and blah, 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 blah. But here's the thing that I think gets why so many people get upset about this in this particular environment, because as you're in there, that's not what it's about. It's supposed to be about the transformation of life itself. It's supposed to be about a world that works for everyone with no one and nothing left out. It's supposed to be about all these altruistic good things, about having people have lives that work. Like you
healing
create
your
this
relationships with your family.
What happens is the team comes in before the start of any weekend. They create a possibility or an outcome. And look, there is a viable use of this technology, but I'm telling you, how they do it at Landmark is not it. So they create a whole possibility. And then that's what the team is listening for. That's what they're going for. But what's happening is there's this aspect where that's being used with the team. Like, okay, now for that to happen, our access to have that happen is everybody does the Landmark Forum. Everybody does the advanced course. Everybody does. So there's a direct line between the possibility and registration. Always, always, always. And when you're on those teams, that you're there supporting registration, and then depending on the threat level in the organization or the environment, that gets more or less stressful depending. Also, different leaders
How
had
close
different.
we are to meeting our quarterly measure.
Right.
Our possibility, but it said possibility, but it is actually the quarterly measure. So there's a couple of things on that as well. Yes, it is business. However, they're volunteers. I was the only person being paid.
Right.
The rest of the people were coming out of their time. And so the Forum in Action team, we would guesstimate when the announcement would be made. It would all depend on how far they got through the distinctions and when you can make the announcement. So I'd say, get there at 11 a.m. and the team would get there at 11 a.m. They wouldn't make the announcement until 2:30. So the team
waiting
has
around
to
all
stay
afternoon.
there
Yeah.
for that time. And it's like, okay, well, lap up. You're getting 3 distinctions here by being in the course. You're privileged and
You get
honored
the
to be
opportunity
here.
to be with a forum leader and to
That's right.
support them in transforming all these people.
That's right. So then, then he would make the announcement, and all the people in the course as well are thinking that they're starving, they're agitated. It's like the energy of the room's completely shifted. And then he makes the announcement. He or she makes the announcement, and we get the results in, and the forum leader's pissed off because only 60% have registered or whatever. What did we do wrong?
Yes.
Have we counted it correctly? So yeah, it's kind of business people could be thinking, yeah, well, I do that every day, not under the pressure that we have. And then it could be that somebody's projectile vomited on the wall, so he's got to clean that up. There's people having breakdowns. It's like, it was
Someone's got to
absolutely,
plunge the toilets.
yeah.
It's someone who assists.
There's something else you said, though. Oh, go ahead. Because, and you and I have done a number of, Dale and I have a standing, every other week date. And, we talk about whatever, is on our mind and kind of how we're doing. Like, if you want to really hear how Ann and Dale are doing in their deconstruction process, listen to Life After Landmark. Because that's what I go on Dale's show to kind of talk about
podcast.
how, wow, what am I seeing? What's opening up for me as all these things happen? But one more thing, and then I want us to kind of move on about what it's been like to speak out publicly. But which is, you mentioned there's been a very common thing, and I was a total flag bearer for this for a long time, which is like, okay, the business operations suck. The business operations are manipulative, are outdated, are all this stuff. Even when I was on staff still, and I would try to change those or do better or whatever. But that's pretty commonly not just talked about, but sort of accepted with a sort of resignation, I think, amongst the devotees. There's a kind of resignation because you do try to change it or be better or whatever, but it's like a circular thing. You can't ever get out of that. And so eventually you kind of surrender. This is my experience. You guys
the people who assist would always be like, can't we just do the credit card registration with a computer? Right. That went on for years.
God. All
right?
that. Yeah.
No, you have to write down the numbers, blah, 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 blah.
So eventually you kind of sort of just surrender to the system because it's the kind of like the price you have to pay in order to play the game of transformation. And this is what I'm now starting to really question, though. I am starting to question the work, the distinctions. Now, part of why I'm starting to question them is because I've done enough study now to kind of see some of the origination, like some of the ideas and the methodologies that it came from, which also starts to reveal some of what's missing inside of, or the way they're taught in Landmark are kind of twisted or distorted or specialized in a way that isn't necessarily always healthy, but also kind of leads to a lot of dead ends. And so I am actually now starting to question the work itself. Now, what I don't question is the experience that people had, breakthrough experiences, that people experience joy and a kind of high. What I'm learning now in my life after Landmark, we should definitely mark this, Dale. We should do an episode about this, but is how to live without going from a low to a high, a low to a high, a low to a high, to feel like I'm productive. Yeah. Because that's one of the things that got really, spending 26 years in that environment, you're like, oh, I got to have a breakthrough to perform. I've got to have, you're constantly pushing. When I worked with Yoga Man, he called it standing at the edge of your mat. Like and that this isn't just in Landmark. I think this is all through. And I do think the human potential movement was a big part of putting this into our society, though, from the 70s, 80s, 90s, this whole thing about, particularly in the United States, just you got to produce at all costs. So whatever, I'm going to make our show explicit now, whatever fuckery you have to do to yourself to get yourself to perform better than the last time, the last guest event you led, the last enrollment conference, the last program, whatever. So I just really, and I'm coming at it with a genuine curiosity of like, I don't know how much we can say the work is good, but the business practices are bad, because what has us sit there for years with those bad business practices and justify them and whatnot is that work. And I know a lot of graduates whose lives aren't working 10 years later, 15 years later, 20 years. I mean, it's one of the things that a lot of people are confronting in our book club is like, wow, I gave up careers. I gave up education. I gave up a lot. And I'm not so sure my life is better off. Doesn't mean I
It's
didn't have
really
great
easy to
experience. Yeah, go
it's
ahead.
easy to confuse that
Please,
dopamine
Mark.
hit that we get in those moments, where there's some breakthroughs happening, right? Whether it's your own or someone else's, you get a high, you get that dopamine hit, you get that feeling of connection, and it feels so good, right?
Mhm.
But I think people confuse that with actual progress in their life, right? Like, so take that now, go do something. And they're telling you to do all that. They're encouraging you to go build and do all that. So it's not that they're not doing that, but I think a lot of people get sucked into the chasing after another hit, another hit, and another hit of the dopamine versus, okay, I'm going to just go do the work. And, I don't really need to take another course right now. I just need to work on the thing that I'm working on. Right.
But
And then what you mentioned earlier was like this idea that as program leaders or as staff members, we had to I better transform something in my life. I got to go find
Oh,
something that
yeah.
I got to transform so that I have a really great share that will enroll people, and then lots of people will register for the thing, and blah, 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 blah. And then it became kind of, it's like earth shattering. It became such a drive that we had to do that. And it's like, why am I not having the drive to actually go produce results in my life versus producing the breakthrough? Like, you were more focused on
The
producing the
breakthrough, so I
breakthrough.
have the powerful share, so I can be effective in my
Yeah,
seminar. And
that
it just,
became more important in some ways than just making more money, let's say.
yeah,
okay,
Dale.
well, I'd like to speak into with that a lot. So first off, with so my experience having left lab, right? I've got a lot of years under my belt compared to you two.
And yeah, how
Um,
many years were you on staff so that people know?
so I was on staff for 2 years and 1/4, and I then became a course supervisor for 2 years. So I was still assisting at a leadership capacity. I did ILP again. So in total, I was around the education for 6 years. However, when I broke the hours down into a standard working week, that is over 10, 12 years. So
Yeah.
the
Let's say that's a
intensity of it
dangerous
is not
exercise.
necessarily, so it's
Careful.
not necessarily the amount of time, but it's the hours spent and the inability to dilute it, like to separate from the system so that I could actually have some clear thinking about it. So the detachment, it took about 20 years to get out of it. And I'm still like, there's still
Whoa.
lots of threats because what I first did when I left was I felt like I had so much time. So I started volunteering for other groups. So this is going to come back to something that you mentioned, Mark, about it's the groups. So I started to throw myself into groups and volunteer my time because it seemed so easy compared to Landmark. It really was a piece of cake. I mean, I just put my hand up. I was really enthusiastic about stuff, and organizers loved me because I was willing. Yes, yeah, I can do that. I'll do that. Time being
She's
my
like, yeah.
word. Easy peasy. But what I found, I got involved in a political group to overthrow a government in Australia. Was one of the first things. I took a big role. I was the organizer for Victoria. But what I found was there was so many ways that these groups controlled the volunteers, and I saw over time, like I went into a lot of different groups, and there was a similar theme. It was all Landmark at a weaker, much weaker organizational level. However, it was the same. I was still being told what to do without question by people who had an ideal or an agenda that I thought I agreed with, because a lot of it was around the social justice, that, there was much that was wrong in the world. But the more I started to, when there was a point where I just started to question, well, who's behind it? This is the same, I'm getting the same thing as Landmark. I'm getting excited. I feel like I was expending so much energy. Very little was coming back as far as financial reward. Did the basics to keep my life running, the very basics of organizing myself so that I could be healthy physically, mentally, financially, and not these volunteer organizations. I started to get that same feel. And then I started to look at, well, who's behind the organization? Once I started to unravel myself from Landmark and have a look, it was no surprise at all that Werner's been involved from the background. We're all told, to connect with family and to share. Of course he's involved. I had no question about that. So I started to apply similar to, well, what's happening with this movement that I was involved with? Who was behind them? Who was paying them? What was their agenda? What was I actually signing myself up for? And the more I became involved, the more I started to be able to detract and spend time contemplating what I was saying. There's formats everywhere. Most people are regurgitating a format. I can hear it here in Australia, some of the things that you guys are saying. It's like, well, who's behind that? So I start to look at the organization and where the money's coming from. Who's paying to have
or
this
going to.
This is, by the way, one of the reasons why organizations like this are so invested in keeping you on a kind of do-gooder high. That's sort of, by do-gooder, because that's really what's used.
But
some
we're saving the
organizations will keep you
world.
on fear, but this one is about keeping you on a save the world high, in that emotional hype, because you think less. You're prefrontal, you're using less. It takes you out of your critical thinking. So when
you don't
we're
question
in a
where the money's coming from or going to.
No, because it feels good. Yeah.
When the answers are avoided, it's like alarm bells. It's like,
Right.
why? Why are you unafraid to say? Why are you
That's why
afraid to say that?
mania is so, Dr. John talks about hypomania, the different levels of mania. But, I've had some friends dealing with bipolar disorder and whatnot, and in these manic states. And one of them was telling me, like, you don't understand, like, mania feels so good. And I'm like, I do understand, actually, because I
You're
can look
so
back now
productive.
and see where I would kind of ramp myself into, like, that is what I was doing day in and day out. A lot as a staff member is getting myself enrolled in that possibility. And honestly, like, even in sales, you do that. It's like, oh, you want to get excited about this person's dream. Like, even when I was selling carpet, like, oh my God, you're going to create the best family room for you and your kids. And okay, we got the perfect carpet for you that they can play games on and blah, blah, blah. We human beings we move and act from our emotions. That is how, and anybody who's selling something that's any good at it, they know that.
Yeah.
And their system is designed to have you do that. So we're not going to change
What's
that.
going to hook them? Yeah.
But I love the way you're pointing to asking these questions, like, but wait a minute, who's benefiting from my current excitement? How is this really working? Yeah. And then, of course, my labor as well, right? So, I mean, that's how high the high is in the Landmark Forum. Not only do you give money to the next course, but you give hundreds and hundreds of hours to the volunteers. Not anymore, just so nobody has to say in
At
the
least
comments.
not in North
We know
America.
that they ended in North America, in the United States, actually. They ended the volunteer program. But it is still alive and well in the culture. It's alive and well in the countries outside of the United States, which is now where they're really investing and growing. It is a component of that system that will not go away completely.
Dale, as far as you know, are they still doing the assisting program in Australia?
I think so. From somebody I spoke with a couple of weeks ago, I'm possibly going to have him on the podcast. He's currently participating. so he's a little bit
Oh boy.
understandably wary about what he says, but I'm really interested to find out more. He said that they're expanding into Asia. So
Well,
the
that's been the
Australian
plan.
team,
So that's been the plan for a while. People don't
yeah.
realize this,
So
but there was literally
well, he said that they did a forum last month, 300 people in Vietnam.
yeah. That's actually been a
So
part of their pattern a while, is go into
Yeah, well,
someplace new.
India has
You
been
get a
big for a while.
you get a
Yeah.
big rush of people, and then it dies down, because if you study LGATs, what you start to see is that the breakthroughs, the insights, enough actual real study hasn't been done to say definitively, but I've seen a bunch of it now. And what studies have been done is it shows, one, the possibility lasts 7 to 10 days. Now, what I think in that doesn't change the fact that we have insights that have us view ourselves, our situation, our circumstances differently, and so we do take different actions. So I do think there's legitimate long-term value in those breakthroughs, for sure. And in the studies that have been done, show that it's not necessarily better than if you didn't do the program. You know,
well, I don't know that the studies are authentic enough to really gather true data, because I think a lot of the organizations are protecting information that they won't make
Right.
public. Like, for example, how many people do commit suicide per year after doing a forum? They're not going to tell
Wow.
that.
They
They don't
And
even
they
know
definitely
the
don't want
ways
anyone
that,
talking about
promise you.
that.
They don't. My
I
husband was
think
a center
they-
manager. They don't know that. They know if
I
they
think
know
they
it.
do. Yes, I think they do.
They do if somebody accuses, if the family or the spouse, that whoever remains from that person comes to Landmark. That's how they know about it. But they don't know about unless somebody circles back to Landmark and says, "Look, my loved one was fine, and they did your program, and then they were depressed and suicidal." That's unless there's a direct link from a family member. They don't know. They don't have any.
Yeah,
Why
and
would they know?
it's hard to establish that kind of link either as a direct link anyway, right? You know, obviously it could be a factor, but there's no way anyone could establish it as a direct link.
Well, only if they don't come back on Tuesday evening because of that. And that has what happened in the Perth.
That's happened. Yes, that absolutely does
Wow.
happen. No, that
Yeah.
happened.
So it happened like on the Monday, someone,
Yes.
wow.
Those
Wow,
are
that's
you're right, Dale. Those are the ones they do know about, is where somebody has, or somebody gets hospitalized while in the program, or et cetera. So
One course supervised, one course I supervised, somebody was taken to a mental hospital as well. So
yeah, we had that pretty
these
frequently in Seattle too.
Yeah, so I think they do have these statistics. They're not going to make them public though, because the
course not.
reflection is too
Well,
damaging.
the liability would just be, yeah.
That's
Well, they've
all.
been sued. Yeah, I mean, we found over 20 lawsuits now, and about half of them are employment issues, and the other half are issues like this, where somebody had a mental break and the people in their life feel they were permanently damaged. So, but I want to swing us a little bit of a different direction, which is just what so you have this experience, in the programs. You volunteer, and then you become a staff member, and then you stop being a staff member, probably because your life isn't working, if it's like every other staff member, and you're probably a little bit sick. But then you keep volunteering, which I think, folks, that's a big thing. I left my staff position in 2012, and then I set up a business and, hosted a mini comeback tour for The Source, Werner Erhard. And, continued very much I was very much inside of the world until 2020. 2020 was the break for me. For that full story, read my book. It's chapter 8, explains exactly all the things that happened that had me go, like you, Dale. It took a lot more for me to start questioning. But then it's like a 3-year process before I'm even like semi-cogent about what I'm seeing. And then even then, I was still kind of, the day my book came out, I still would have referred somebody to Landmark Forum with a bunch of caveats, and if the circumstances were just right. Today, I would not, because of what's happened since my book came out.
Y'all just didn't know how to come out of the closet, see?
We did not, Mark.
You gotta
true.
go to a queen for that, right? I'll
Yeah,
teach you how to come out of the closet.
So true. Oh my God, so true.
But it is so similar, right? This idea of coming out right? It's the
Yeah.
same deal. Like you have to come out even and say, yeah, I participated in this thing. And there's
So
some
why do
not so
we
great
think there's so
aspects of
guys?
it, you know?
So let's throw that on the table. Why do we think there's so few people that have come out publicly? So I now have, I don't know about you guys, I think you both had the same experience. Once you do come out publicly, you have a lot of people coming to you privately, like a lot. Like
You're
my
now the
life was
touchstone.
completely
Yeah.
swamped for the last 6 months, like completely swamped.
After the interview with Chris, I just got emails from all around the world and sat privately chatting with people who will not go public.
Yeah.
Will
Right.
not go public.
I
So what
was
do we
on the
think that's
subway
about?
yesterday. I was riding home on the subway, and a former graduate that I led as the classroom leader for TMLP, the Team Management Leadership Program. She goes, "Mark, you're here," and she was literally getting off on her stop. Right? She's like, "Mark, oh my God, here's my number." She quickly gave me her number. I was like, "I have your number. It's okay." I texted her, right? But it was so funny too because it was like she was very furtive on the subway right before her stop.
Right.
Yeah.
So
And
Yeah.
I think a lot of it boils down to there's a physical element. You know, our nervous systems are wired. They're wired from birth to connect with our parents. There's the physical connection between mother and child. So it's like breaking a circuit. And Landmark do step in as a parent. You know, they take in my critical analysis of what actually happens is, you know, inviting parents to come and participate. Then that neutralizes the family because the mother and daughter become best friends. You know, the daughter could be the course supervisor of the mother during a course.
Yes.
So
My mother did the course
What
that I
happens
led.
all the time.
all the
Oh my
time.
gosh, I
Yeah.
never thought of it like that, Dale. That's
I had my
interesting.
mother
Yeah.
do my mother lives in another state, and she did the form in another state, but I had her come to New York to do the communication courses. And of course, I was doing the Team Management Leadership Program while my mother was doing the communication coururses. So I was accountable for
She gets talked down to you. So the roles
Yeah.
are reversed. The
Oh
husband and
my.
wife
I never
as
thought
well.
about that before.
The mother, the wife becomes the supervisor. The husband is the sound engineer or whatever.
That's
so
right.
the roles
Yeah.
are in reverse. All it gets really mixed up. So the family is perhaps equalized or disrupted to such a degree that we have to put I'm the mother now hat on. I'm
Yeah.
the daughter hat. I'm the course supervisor hat on. So,
Right.
but who stays the parent is the center. The
That's
center
true.
is
That's-
right.
Wow.
So then
I
this
had never thought of it that way.
wiring-
I know, Mark, my mind is
Well-
kind of going, because I recognize, I mean, I'll think about it a bunch more, but like I recognize what you're saying. That's very familiar. And particularly the thing you said about breaking a circuit. Because I
Yes.
mean, I remember the whole process of writing my book, which was such a cathartic healing process all by itself. I mean, I had to pay a coach and a publisher and a book out, all that stuff. And it was like the best therapy I've paid for. I mean, I've had a lot of therapy and I like therapy, but honestly, it was incredibly therapeutic because it was like, wait, what? What? And as they were working with me on the different chapters and how to write the book, I was like, oh, and it was just it was kind of a nurturing experience, honestly. But then at the end, right before it was published, I was so scared. I was so scared. It was like, and yes, I had things like they might sue me. It was more about my community. Everybody would hate me like that. For me, it was like
Entire social structure.
I was
becomes
cutting
in.
off the last 26 years of that's what I thought was going to happen. I thought I was cutting off the last 26 years of my life. My husband and a few core people that had been walking through this process with me, they would stick around, which interestingly enough, a couple of them are the ones that dropped off after the book came out, which was sort of weird. But I was like, I knew my life, like it literally felt like my life as I knew it was going to be over. And
the same.
That's
If
literally what it feels like for queer people to come out before they come out. Like,
Really?
that's the
Yeah.
same exact, like, what's going to happen if I tell people, I know I need to tell people, I need to talk about this, I need to be honest, I need to live true to myself, but I will lose all my friends. it's the fear,
Mhm.
right? And then, of course, you come out and then everyone has different experiences. But for the most part, you find out, okay, the world didn't end. My life didn't explode. The people who give a damn, it's like the ones who care don't give a damn, and the ones who did give a damn don't care. I forget that expression, but it's like, the people who are going to stick with you, and everyone else, whatever.
So I'm
Right.
going to throw something else into the mix with that. It's
Okay.
also like introducing people to the forum, like actually coming out as a forum junkie to friends, and the risk is real because it could
Yes.
be that it could be that they participate and you become best friends. It's like it's so risky because it's unknown territory and you're altering the wiring. So the nervous system is having to adjust. And our nervous systems are, I see them as mycelium networks. If you look at the way they feed through the skeletal system, the ends are at our hands and our feet. And when we shake hands, we're connecting a network with other people. When we and with Landmark, because of the no-touch policy, we came with our words. We connect with people. So the risk, we come out of our safety zone, and we're putting ourselves at risk, and it's dangerous.
Mhm.
Because you could change that I can never return to. And so,
Right.
when you're speaking about, I was so nervous with Chris Shelton. I was like, what the fuck have I just done? Oh my
Right.
God.
Am I
But
betraying everything I stood for?
That's
yes,
let's talk
yeah.
about betrayal for a
Like,
sec, because that's yeah, go ahead, Dale. Finish.
So, but the thing was, the opposite happened. I was so free. It's like I had emptied my head. I'd vomited everything onto a table and I could see it. So it's like the subjective objective, the fine line of dancing between who I thought I was, being able to take a good look at it and hear myself. I could hear myself so this comes back to the LGATs as well. We can hear ourselves in a public forum. It's
Yeah.
different than private forum. This had gone out to the world. I haven't even listened to my interview with Chris again. Like I can't go near it. But I had people sharing with me different parts, and I was like, okay, well, it must have been okay. There's lots of
The
people
stuff
that have
that moved
talked, and
them. Yeah.
and I got into the comments. Because I didn't have any other avenue. There wasn't a website. I didn't dare make myself that publicly known to own it myself. I
Yeah.
had Chris to partner with, but I went into the comments and I started answering them straight away, and being in communication with it, and that released something. It was like, okay, so it's not the same. It's very different, but it's a good different. It's a very good different. I can breathe. Like,
Mhm.
Nice.
I'm
Yeah.
actually able to sit down now with people and listen because my head wasn't filled. So, and again, it comes back to our nervous systems start to reach out. They start to, rather than retract, and physically people do start to get smaller. I could see that
Yeah.
in the physical way people were holding themselves physically. So we start to expand again. And the nervous system, it's a line of no return. So
That's
it's
right.
quite, in answer to why do we go back? Because the weaning ourselves out of, it's like coming off the teeth. We
Mhm.
have to, it's a huge adjustment. We need little increments to cut cold turkey. Is really challenging. Anyway, so
Well,
Wow. No,
just to
that's
finish out that,
such a great way to say it.
it's a
Yeah.
beautiful, and I mean, yeah, Mark, for you, it feels like what she's saying feels familiar, right? Like that's, really like, oh,
And it
wow,
is
that's a
the
really
whole
interesting discovery.
experience of coming out as a queer person too, right? Because
Wow.
then you're living authentically, living true to yourself, right? And telling the truth about,
right.
we tell the truth about, we got all these great things out of our participation at Landmark, and there was this other stuff.
Yeah.
So telling the truth about that is very freeing, right? Because you're
Yes.
like, okay, now, and I didn't die. And then other people are now, me too. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for being
Yes.
the first one to say that right now. Obviously, Dale, you really were the first one.
You really were, that
You
we
were the
know
first
of.
one doing this on YouTube and publicly in this way. Obviously Anne's book, but like I have people now coming to me going, wow, thank you for telling your story. You were the first one. And I can't believe other people had this same experience. Here's mine, blah, 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 and then they tell you the whole story, right?
Well, it's a matter, it feels like you're taking a fractured self and coming back to being a whole self. Like that's how it, because it's very confusing when you're having these high emotional experiences. You are, all of your friends, you have this amazing social life, out of this. And yet your gut, is going like, but I don't think that was right. Or, oh, that bad thing happened over there. Like it's hard to
There's a
balance
cognitive
that.
dissonance that we start to live with.
So when we can only, that's why I love this whole confronting the line, Mark and I was talking about, it's like on the line where you can talk about the dark side and the light side and all the stuff in between. That's when we can really learn and grow, because what's guaranteed, if you don't talk about it, you're going to end up in another high control relationship, either with a partner,
That's right.
with a work organization, or some kind of
group,
whether it's a yoga group or a health group or whatever. You may be like, okay, I'm not doing any more encounter Elgaddy groups like Landmark, but you know what? I'm going to go. I love this church, or I love this yoga
this
group.
political party.
You're going to keep.
And there's also then being able to empathize with people who are not ready. This saying, Mark, I'm sure people that are not quite ready to come out, is empathizing. It's like, I got it, because you will never be the same. And, it is pretty good, but it's up to you, because...
you have to pick your own moments, for sure.
Yeah, and so there are people that aren't ready to acknowledge the dark side of Landmark. And I empathize with that, because then you get to see it you really have to look at your own participation there.
Right.
Like, how did I go there? What was missing for me? And then it's a real, there's a level of self-awareness that has us change again. So
there's another,
and then you step into that same kind of toxic relationship.
There's another piece inside of that too that I'm seeing, because since I wrote my book, and I have lots of people talking. We have our book club on Facebook where it's a place where we can share and talk and swap stories and find stuff. And one of the things too is a lot of us are finding, and I would say this is happening for me too, as I'm doing this group with Rachel Bernstein, right? So for people who've been a part of LGATs or high control groups, and they want to just understand what the heck's going on. How do I reclaim myself? Whatever questions they have, right? So we can come participate in this group. But I'm seeing that a lot of my participation in Landmark allowed me to mask and hide from a lot of issues that I wasn't dealing with. I actually say now, somebody asked me recently, what do you think's the most dangerous aspect of Landmark? And I would say, well, putting aside those people who were directly, verbally, physically assaulted and abused, which definitely happens. So that's hands down, no bueno, right? Not good. But after that, actually, I think the most damaging aspect in general for people who participated a lot, whether it be at the assisting level or at an accountability level, such as a leader body, isn't as much what you got, it's what you didn't get because you were doing that. I'm seeing people who are really dealing with dynamics in their family that never got addressed. And now they're in their 60s and they're trying to address boundaries. They're trying to address narcissistic abuse. They're trying to address, psychological and spiritual issues that just are not touched in these kinds of trainings. But these kinds of trainings pretend that they are. Like I have a friend that's in kind of a mental health crisis right now. And she's hanging out in possibility, in a kind of manic possibility world, which is allowing her to not look at these destructive things and literally creating a disassociative state. It's so funny. I'm getting a front row seat to exactly what Dr. John talks about that's dangerous in these kinds of programs, in the way that the work is packaged and delivered. And so there's that. The other thing I wanted us to touch on just a little bit is the betrayal element. Did you guys, that was a big thing for me. I was going to be betraying my friends. I was going to be betraying my oath. And I think underneath that was a lot of I'm risking my reputation. I'm giving up a lot, because I was kind of hot shit in that circuit for a while, and that was definitely there. But the bigger thing, I even had a couple of days before the book came out, and I heard Werner was in some kind of emergency surgery or whatnot, or possibly on death's door. And I was like, I have to protect him. And then I literally was looking around like, what am I talking about? That's like, saying we got to protect Harvey Weinstein all of a sudden. No, you know, like it was, but I noticed that's been a little difficult to unwind. Like this,
Yeah.
somehow I'm betraying the work, I'm betraying transformation. And then I had a genuine, being an empath, I had a genuine concern that like people they would invalidate their own transformation, which has also turned out to not be
Yeah.
true.
Did you have that
Interesting.
experience,
That.
Dale?
Well, interesting. I remember preparing the format to lead an introduction one time. And Sandy, I can't remember her surname, the foreign leader, Sandy from the States somewhere. She was working with me directly. And at one point she said, "You've been betrayed, haven't you?" And I was like, wow, that's it. That's what it was. That was my experience with my mother. I was betrayed. And that released something for me, in a way that it answered a really deep question. And I saw it for what it was. And it's easier. It's like, it's not a bad thing to have betrayed. I just got it for what it was.
Mhm.
So with my experience with Landmark, that's actually what started to happen. Was I could sense that relationship with my mother was happening again, being gaslit, the lies, the pretend she'd never touched a drop of alcohol, and then there was in the format, the policies and procedures, one of the questions was, does anybody commit suicide after the Landmark Forum? So this is after, I'd found my housemate hanging in my apartment. And I remember my tongue trying to get around the words that Dr. Raymond Fowler says it's suicide. I was just like, this is complete bullshit.
Did your roommate commit suicide on the weekend of doing close to doing a Landmark Forum? I'm curious if there was in that
around 2 weekends after.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
Very soon.
Yeah. But I remember his demeanor completely altered. He was like shell shocked when he came out of it. His face, one side of his face started to drop. There was something that physically altered within him. And I think the answer that he got, or whatever he saw in there, reaffirmed what he'd been believing about the world. So
Yeah.
something
The other thing
so true.
I've had some mental health professionals tell me, and I've seen this I've seen this with graduates over time, because I was involved enough and I worked enough with the graduate community to see some of this too, is one of the things that happens in an LGAT is you have this really peak experience and you're like, and it's reified. I mean, I talk about the story in my book where somebody said, a forum leader said to me, like, this guy, he completed his PTSD in a masterclass with me or a seminar or whatever it was. And I'm like, no, if you really understand complex trauma, that's not a thing. That's just not a thing. That's just not how it works. But I can, I know this person is a good person, the forum leader, and, these are like good people, but for a minute you believe it, right? So for a minute you're like, I'm cured, which in Landmark language is, I'm complete. I'm complete. I'm complete with that thing with the betrayal with my mother. It's done. And then what happens is 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Yeah. What happens is you start experiencing symptoms, in the truest word of symptoms, like maybe you start having those negative thoughts again, or maybe you start feeling low.
Yeah.
A lot of people will crash, like you'll come crashing down. Most of my crashing was physically, because my daughter would always know when I came home. She'll still to this day tell you about how on Mondays when mom got home, you could not talk to her for 24 hours and I would just sleep. Like I couldn't. And
after a weekend,
after leading particularly, but the same was pretty true for the courses too. You come home and you're just like, oh, you're white. So, but then what happens is even transformation won't work on me. So we know that shame and guilt are two of the kind of lowest energetic, vibrations and emotions, and feed very much into the suicidal ideation, and for sure people that act on it. So there's a lot of hidden dangers, which I still don't think means we stop doing all those trainings. It means that we get straight about what are the dangers, what are the warning labels, what's the truth,
Yes.
and then really allow people the dignity of full choice. Choice is not available if you don't have all the information. It just isn't.
Yeah.
And they've been in business. That particular organization has been in business long enough and had enough feedback, whether it's through the legal system or graduates or whatever, to know what the dangers are. And they continue to try to stomp out any talk about that. And, I mean, Dale, you and I have had this conversation a couple times. I'm like, if they would just be what they are and be honest about it, I actually think they'd do okay.
Well, here's another interesting insight I've had recently is that the response time is really important to know if something's alive or not.
Mm-hmm.
However, how fast it responds, that's a sign of life. You can play with a baby, you make eye contact and respond straight away. Corpses don't respond. Then they can't respond. So, and there's a couple of examples with that is, when I did the interview with the ABC, when you talk about being nervous, I was so nervous when Hagar Cohen's, the way she set the interview up and what actually happened, she played
Can you just say quickly, because I know what you're referencing, but just for our viewers that don't. So it was a national television show that did a story.
in Australia.
And you were, and you were one of the people they interviewed.
She approached me. I think I'd been writing a blog or something, and she found it. I mean, it would have been easy to find anybody that was on the algorithm that had anything against Landmark. So she found me. She asked if I would do an interview, and I said, sure. And like I built a relationship, find out where she was coming from because I didn't trust media. And I contacted a couple of other people, see if they were willing to. One person did. She was willing to talk, so she was great. And then, so we set up the time for an interview, and I spoke with somebody who was in relationship with somebody on staff. And I said, I'm going to do an interview to talk about Landmark. She spoke to the staff person. Within less than 24 hours, Hagar Cohen had got a call from Nancy Sapolsky that to find out where she was coming from with the interview. So, when we're talking about response times. When they are threatened, they respond so quickly. The word gets around in an instant because people are there to protect and defend. This person that I offhandedly said, I was speaking to her as a friend, forgetting that she was involved with Landmark and involved in a relationship with somebody on staff.
You want to talk about betrayal?
Yeah, so thinking that I can have a private conversation about this. And she told me, she said, well, I told the person on staff, and I said, well, that explains how Hagar got a phone call that was less than 24 hours. Right. So the response time when they think they're getting attacked or when people think that their belief system is going to get attacked, they'll be super fast. And yet, all of these other areas that are damaging to the participants, they're comatose.
Yeah.
They're
things that you've run up the line, like they tell you to, that will just go weeks, months, years with no response, or just never a response.
Decades. Yeah. And now they're having to respond. They had to respond with COVID. COVID forced them to actually start to reorganize their business, but it wasn't voluntary. It wasn't out of, an urge to grow and develop in the way that so many people have been talking about for decades. Yeah, to change the behavior.
Yeah, to move into the 21st century.
That's demanded of us. We know in the course of 3 days, within the first segment of a course, get into action. But the hypocrisy, and that's also what I felt, when I'm talking about how I became involved in organizations afterwards, listening for hypocrisy. That was, what are they saying? What are they doing?
You never thought you would need that skill, didn't you?
That's right.
Well, so you bring this point up quite a bit when we talk too. The age of the internet has really changed because you really can Google now, and you can go on TikTok, and you can go on and you can see all this stuff. Back in our day, I started participating in 95, 96, whatnot. participated. It was, either in a program leader body or on staff or whatnot with Landmark till 2012. And then going on to then, host the Warner apparatus, which really had me working more in that it's like one circle out from Landmark, kind of, sort of, but closer into the source, into the center. So, so till 2020, essentially. I mean, 2020 was my breakup. So, I wouldn't say, I think I'm still in the wake up phase. You mentioned earlier that Mark and I are pretty great, because you've had almost 20 years now to be thinking about this. And I think it's worth noting that a conscious person is thinking about this for 20 years. It's that impactful in our lives. Those 6 years are so impactful. I may spend the rest of my life kind of deconstructing. I love that term, deconstructing and unpacking, as I find ways. Like, I just noticed the other day that I am incredibly predisposed to volunteer and give away my labor and time to anybody who wants it.
Yep.
I mean, just completely. And I'm kind of having a struggle with that because I like being that way. I like being generous. I like being, I like contribution. But I just noticed, I'm like, whoa, I wonder how much of that would have been around if I hadn't have just spent 26 years giving away either completely or for significantly less than the, even agreed value.
Market value.
Yeah.
Well,
So
one of the things that I'm currently, as a result of this experience, I'm currently exploring for myself is, what if I invest that time, energy, passion into my own business?
yeah,
If I call myself to account for, like I would for somebody else, it's coming back to the Landmark work. Also, what you pointed to before, and about the work versus the architecture, but it's still something we've spoken about. It's still us.
Yes.
It's what we bring. It's not the work. It's not the architecture. It's us and how we relate to ourselves. So this for me is ongoing. Like, when I look at being as disciplined with myself around my health and fitness, around promoting my own business, around investing time and energy online to learn what I need to know to grow my own business, having that amount of vigor. I mean, it was only 2 nights ago I realized that this place that I live in was a separation from my family. There was a point where I did send letters to them. I disconnected with them. They had nothing to do with Landmark. It had more to do with, was I willing to be with somebody who had betrayed, my experience of being betrayed so deeply? Was I willing to put more time and energy into that? And the answer was no. And so I separated from my family. I sent them letters. I said, this is what's going on for me. I'm headed out. I'm going to the other side of town. And I got myself an apartment that was, quite expensive, out of reach, but somehow it's all worked. And I saw this space that I'm living in as a commitment to developing who I don't even yet know myself to be. And what's that going to take? So even just every morning I'm waking up with, well, what do I need to do today to forward myself without being part of a group?
Yeah,
and it's
me too.
really hard.
It's really hard. Yeah, I have some friends that every morning we get up and we do that. Okay, well, I have a question for the three of us.
Hold on.
Oh yeah, Mark.
Hold on. I didn't get to answer my question about betrayal.
You answer.
Right?
Yeah.
So
and then I have a good
here's the thing.
question.
I wasn't so worried about betraying the group or the organization or the graduates. My whole thing, because I got betrayed, like that was my experience, was an experience of betrayal by the designation team, by my coach, by the, everyone, actually, interestingly enough, everyone but the forum leader who was accountable for the seminar leaders. He was the only one who actually was like, well, people kind of do stuff, everyone else was like, God, Mark, how could you be involved in this lifestyle and do these things and blah, 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 that would bring shame upon us, blah, blah, blah. Like, it was a betrayal on every level from every one of them. I was not worried about betraying the graduates, but I was so deeply, I needed to protect the graduates from hearing about the sausage making. right?
That's good.
That was the
Yeah.
part. I kept quiet because I didn't want them to know just all this insanity that's happening behind the scenes, right? And the real,
You don't want to
like,
break their
now I
heart.
would say the cultishness of it. Yeah, exactly. I don't want to break their heart because they got good stuff out of it. I was leading the team management leadership program. These people were building businesses. They were doing amazing things in the world, and they still are, right? Like the person who I ran into in the subway or yesterday, she made this amazing thing. There was someone who I see her posting all the time on Facebook. She created this amazing travel business. And this woman was terrified to even say that that's kind of what she wanted to do. And I encouraged her, and boom, now, 5-10 years later,
Yeah.
she's got this amazing, hugely successful business, right? So I was so worried about protecting them from hearing about all this insanity that was going on behind the scenes, right? And then, of course, there's all the shame that they try to imbue upon you of, in my particular case, like they were trying to make me feel ashamed for what I was doing. And then, of course, I
Yeah.
just had to say, absolutely not. No, I'm not going back into any damn closet ever again.
Mm.
So yeah, that was my
Well, and there
experience.
is,
I,
I've,
I never thought I would betray anyone. I never did.
yeah,
But it was
gotcha.
like that sense of they betrayed me.
Well, I was, interestingly, this is how unhealthy I was in a way, was I felt completely betrayed by them on multiple times and was still worried about betraying them. Like that's how insidious. And but
Yeah.
you're right, that for me that was a big thing too, is oh gosh, if I'm going to break people's heart, because it broke my heart. So I
Yeah.
didn't want to
Seeing
break
everything
people's heart.
that
I
I
didn't want
know.
people to hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I say I'm still like that. I still say very little about what I actually know,
And
for a
here's the thing, we
myriad
should
of
talk about this.
reasons. Yeah.
Yeah, some people are now bugging us and saying, Anne, why aren't you really saying it? Why aren't you telling us the real truth? Come on, you keep hinting at all this stuff, Anne.
Details. Yeah, they want the details.
But yeah, we should talk about that. Of course, we're not going to say all the details because they're not our story to tell necessarily at any given moment. But say a little bit about why you haven't just spilled all the beans.
Well, the reason I didn't spill all the beans in my book is I actually didn't want a book that was about Werner. I wasn't out to write a book about Werner. I was out to write a book about what it's like when you find out something you've given your life to may not be what you thought it was. And how do you walk through that What is that like? What is that like to wake up to your point of view, your, something you've invested financially, physically, years in, and to find out it isn't maybe everything that you thought it was, or even what you thought it was, right? Like that was what I wanted to explore. So that was the first thing. I didn't want to get distracted and turn it into a whole slugfest. And then honestly, I actually really, I also didn't, honestly, people are going to think this is weird, but I didn't want to hurt him or the people, and I don't want to hurt people. And even people who are mean people or who do hurtful things. This is why I think when Chris started talking to me about weaponized empathy, it was so interesting to me because I could see where my empathy has gone too far, maybe sometimes. And so there was that. And then the other thing, so now since then, I also have a deep respect for people own their own stories. So I have a deep, deep, deep respect for people's right to tell their own story. And I do hope, this is part of why I wanted to do this episode with the three of us tonight, talking about this. I do hope out of us talking about what it's like, that more people will come forward and start to tell their stories, because it is so healing and it is scary as shit. I'm not going to deny it. It's scary. But as soon as you step over that line and you start talking, Dale, you described it so well. It's like
freeing. Yeah.
And sometimes, it's messy. We've seen Brian Nord, God bless him. I just love, he's got his process, and sometimes I'm in awe. Sometimes I'm in total terror for him. But
he wears his heart right on his sleeve, right?
His heart is on his sleeve. His deconstruction is happening out loud and live in real time. And that's such a generous gift that he's given to us.
Yeah.
And, people have the right to tell their story in the way they want to tell their story. And that's what I also like about, Dale has a particular style with her Life After Landmark show that I just
That's why
love.
we have to acknowledge you for that.
It's been very nurturing for me to really, what is Life After Landmark? And what are the good parts and the bad part, all that. And, Mark, you and I are, we're finding our way and like looking at all the different juxtapositions and this and, like that. But I do want to encourage more people, like it's safe over here. It's safe on this side to start talking, and we can help
None
people.
of us died.
And I do want to acknowledge, I do have excellent lawyers. I have excellent coaches. I have, who have also really helped me. And, there's times when I've stepped in it for sure, but they really helped me sort out what I want to say publicly, what I don't, how to do that in a way that is not defamatory. And if anything, I've been overly cautious. But honestly, Mark, too, it does come down to people are going to ultimately know all the stuff I know. It's coming out.
It's all going to come out. Yeah.
It's
sooner rather
coming
than
out.
later.
Some of it's come out before, but it hasn't come out in the context of this times. But it's coming.
And it all has to be paced because it's a digestion. We've got to digest little bits and pieces. We can't just whack people over the head with information. I want to say something further to the people that are considering that, maybe you're thinking what I have to say isn't interesting, but there are different formats that you can come and speak with me, or you can speak with Anne, or you can speak with Mark. Like, there's different ways that we can present information, and we always have a pre-conversation. So, we meet and have a look at what can we talk about, what's interesting to you. I'm really
what are you
curious.
comfortable sharing?
Yeah, exactly. So it's not like we're going to throw you in the deep end straight away. I'm really, really interested in people sharing about some of the crazy shit we did in Lerma. Oh my God, learning the format. I know of somebody that on an aeroplane came out and delivered part of his format. There's mirror work, going into public toilets and doing mirror work because time is of the essence, right? It's like juggling all these bits and pieces of things that we had to learn in amongst our daily lives. So there's a mirror in a public toilet. Great. Deliver some of the format. Be with yourself.
Yeah.
Somebody walks in.
And make
it's
sure
like,
you wipe down everything in the public toilet while you're at it.
I still do that, for the record. I still clean up restrooms. I love that habit.
So do I. So who else is doing these kind of things? And what is it that you remember from, like what I shared about my experience in the forum? And I was thinking, as you were speaking before, it's like that moment, those moments are so crystal clear. It's like I entered into a different portal. I entered into something that I didn't know was available. It's like a crystal clear photograph that has stuck with me forever. And as I shared the experience, I found myself in there. I can imagine the place I was sitting and how I was looking. So they're the kind of things that I would love to talk with people about. It doesn't have to be. And then, what were you uncomfortable with? What were some of the areas that you started to think, maybe this is not for me anymore? And what had you step away, and what's it like now to listen to us? So come up and share. Even if you don't,
that's beautiful.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I have a little.
Even if it's private, even if you just want to call us and be like, hey, here's what happened to me. We're not out here just to get guests, just to get, attention. We're really interested in hearing what happened to you. What was your experience like, on whatever level.
How do you apply it now? Like, what has stuck with you? What are the things that you're just, like cleaning public toilets, if that's your thing, or, having to acknowledge if you've done something that could have offended somebody, or like what that thing about walking on the other side of what would it be like to and never have to walk on the other side of the street because somebody's approached you don't want to talk to. Living with the integrity. Do you still stop at the red lights? The little green man, if he's not flashing, will you stop it?
Right.
Those kind of things.
Yeah.
And, and I am admittedly a little obsessed with the dark side right now, mostly because I spent so many years in the light side. Now I'm kind of like, whoa, wow, what is that? What is that? And I want to turn it upside down and inside out and examine it and whatnot. So I'm interested also, I am interested in hearing from people who we have the benefit of hindsight, actually. We also have the benefit of a lot of new neuroscience. We have a benefit of a lot of new understanding and how trauma impacts us, for example. And I think that's relevant, not necessarily because landmark traumatizes people, although it does some, I now know, because I've heard from so many. But it also brings up trauma, but in an untrained environment, in an environment where the leaders and facilitators aren't really aware of
Not
that.
equipped,
They don't have
really.
they're not equipped. Exactly. And again, this is something I think that's happening all over in the personal development space, not just Landmark. In fact, Landmark is probably more responsible than many that I've encountered, honestly. But I think there's things for us to learn if we're willing to examine honestly. And that's my passion. Like I want to hear people who want to examine and look. All right, I have one wrap up question for us. So we're going to each get like just a couple of words. So what has been the most surprising? So since Dale is our guest, let's start with her and then we'll mark him up. But so since speaking publicly, what has been the most what has surprised you the most, Dale? Or something that really surprised you? We've touched a few, but
it was the catharsis.
Mm.
I could not imagine. I was so entrenched in the headfuck of Landmark, so entrenched that it was unimaginable to think of myself or consider myself or even envision myself, imagine myself being so free to create. That has been one of the greatest surprises. And I was also surprised by the lack of response. Really, I thought that there'd be more people that would be willing to talk publicly, given that we're all coming from a sharing environment. That it would be there would be people that would be open to sharing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been a surprise.
Yeah.
And that even so long, that it took so long for other people to start talking. That's been a surprise.
Yeah.
Given the amount of controversy that lives within that organization.
Right.
Yeah.
You're here.
Yeah. Wow.
Mark, for you.
So for me, one of the biggest aspects of when I was being dealt with by the designation team for my, my sinfulness, right? All the nasty, dirty sexual stuff I was doing, right? The biggest aspect of that was, but we have to present in a certain way and you can't really be with the graduates and all this BS, right? And I said, this is BS. It's total BS. Of course, this is a human experience. And what better person to have at the front of the room than someone who's also experienced all of that stuff they're dealing with, right? So the surprising part is, since telling my story and since coming out, I've had so many people talk about how they're polyamorous or they're in an open relationship or they want to have an open relationship. Literally, someone who was in the TMLP, like very recently, came to me and was just like, Mark, thank you for telling your story. It was so amazing. I've been with my partner for X number of years now, and I'm really curious what it's like to open up your relationship, right? And I'm like, okay, well, we can talk, right? No problem, right? And I was like, see, I was right all along. See, like people, either, it's not for everyone, right? But for the people that it is, it's something we could talk about, and it's not a big deal. It's human life, human sexuality, right? And just so many people coming forth and being like, yeah, me too. Yeah, I'm that way, or I'm bi, or I'm poly, or I'm pansexual, or whatever it is, But the number of people coming out to me now is so funny.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. Well,
And you, Anne?
Yeah, for me, I still am I still find myself somewhat shocked that the abuse that I thought was so egregious in the Werner circle is so pervasive in the Landmark culture. That still startles me. I mean, and it's slowed down the amount of stories I'm getting, but probably still a solid one a week of somebody telling me
Particularly
a
in the centers
story.
division, right?
Particularly in the centers division, for sure. There's a little tendrils here and there and everywhere, but it's definitely in the seminar leader program. Like, near as I can tell, that's a hellscape. But anyway,
That's
in terms of the leader bodies, and that's the most, I don't, this isn't a survey, but it does still surprise me how pervasive and how long lived. So this is an organization, while it's changed iterations and but it's pretty solidly the same for 45 of its 50 years. I think the first 5 years or so were probably trying out a lot of things and whatnot, but that's the other part that's been surprising as I've really started to learn the so much of the history of the organization is how much it doesn't transform. Like, how is this organization that's about transformation and purports to have they have lots of business consultants, and many of them are very good and some of them are awful, just like the leaders, but that's so about transformation that just will not transform and will continue to use old hiding tactics, defensive tactics to suppress the truth. And it's just like, man, why are you doing that? If what you have to offer truly is good, why are you doing that? I don't get it. And the amount, the depth of
a lot of the people that are on that designation team in the seminar body, particularly in the North Atlantic, have been seminar leaders for 40 years, 40 years, no change, no, literally. And you look at some of these people and, frankly, the graduates used to be like, who's leading that? Oh, that, no, I don't want to take that seminar. And we couldn't really talk about that, right? As apprentices or as candidates, it's like, I didn't register X number of people because literally I had 10 people tell me I'm not doing a seminar with that person. Because they're crazy or they're old or weird or whatever,
the legacies. You can't question the legacies. And that's probably
nothing about people's age. That's about people's mentality. When I say that old, that weirdness.
You got chocolate or vanilla, you choose chocolate. Choose that.
Yeah. So, this has been really awesome, you guys. Thank you. And hopefully, more people are going to step up and just let's have these conversations. And sometimes they're messy and sometimes they're confusing and sometimes they're, challenging and whatnot. But I can tell you that not having them does not have them go away. There's a lot of people I've, also I just don't want to deal with it. And I've now seen first in my daughter, God bless her, I call her one of my best teachers as I walk beside her as she deals with her complex trauma. But I now have a number of friends, a number of people as we age. So I just turned 56 last week. And I'm almost in adulthood. But as we age, what I'm seeing is trauma and undigested cognitive dissonance, truth, whatever, doesn't age well. So I want more people to talk because I want more healing. And anyway, I want more healing. And
just a different way of saying age as we mature.
As we mature, right.
Develop and grow up. That's available at any age. And what I'm finding also is having dared to share, then I'm maturing much faster. I'm maturing in a way that insights come much faster and I can act on them and possibly a lot quieter than I used to be because I'll sit back and listen rather than throw myself in head first with my hands up.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much, Dale, for being with us. Dale's podcast is called Life After Landmark. You can find it on YouTube. And is it available in podcast form as well?
No.
Just on YouTube. That's simple.
Yeah. So I'm kind of not really taking it seriously. They're just as an avenue for people to speak so that we're on the record.
Those stories are amazing. The people who you've interviewed are great. You have this regular thing with Anne, but you've had so many people tell their stories and it's just amazing. You got to go over there, people. So it's called Life After Landmark. And we're so grateful for you for being with us, Dale. And until next time, this has been Confronting the Line.
Thank you. Thank you. See you.
Thank you, Mark.